Welcome to the lecture on the pelvis and the pelvic floor. The pelvis consists of the two hip bones, right and left, the sacrum, and the coccyx. The joints of the pelvis are the sacroiliac joint and the pubic symphysis. The sacroiliac joint, also called the SI joint, is located posteriorly and is the articulation between the auricular surface on the wing of the ilium and the auricular surface of the sacrum. The SI joints have irregular joint surfaces and are generally fused in males over age 50. A small amount of movement occurs in the SI joints with lumbar flexion and extension. The sacroiliac joints are held together by very strong ligaments called the anterior and posterior SI ligaments. The long head of biceps femoris, which is also known as the medial hamstring, is continuous with the sacrotuberous ligament, which blends with the posterior sacroiliac ligament. Take this opportunity to pause the lecture to draw in the anterior and posterior sacroiliac ligaments. The anterior sacroiliac ligaments will be located on the anterior side of the SI joint and run in a horizontal fashion, whereas the posterior SI joint ligaments will be on the posterior aspect and run in a horizontal direction over the SI joint. In this slide, the anterior and posterior sacroiliac ligaments are drawn in red. Notice there are two other ligaments drawn in. The one that's drawn in pink is called the sacrotuberous ligament, and it runs from the sacrum to the ischial tuberosity. The one drawn in blue is called the sacrospinous ligament, and it goes from the sacrum to the ischial spine of the ischium. Once these ligaments are drawn in, you will notice that they form foramen, the greater sciatic foramen and the lesser sciatic foramen. The greater sciatic foramen is formed by these ligaments and the greater sciatic notch of the ilium, whereas the lesser sciatic foramen is formed by these ligaments and the lesser sciatic notch of the ischium. The pubic symphysis is the articulation between the right and left symphyseal borders of the superior pubic ramus of the pubis. It is a cartilaginous joint and contains a fibrocartilage disc. There's also a ligament on the inferior aspect of the joint called the inferior pubic or arcuate ligament. During pregnancy, a hormone called relaxin is released through the body, begins about the 5th month of gestation. The purpose of this hormone is to relax the pubic symphysis to allow for growth of the fetus and delivery of the baby. This opportunity to pause the lecture to draw in the inferior pubic ligament. Now let's talk about the connective tissue of the pelvis. The obturator membrane is the connective tissue that fills in the obturator foramen. It serves as a surface for muscle attachments. The two main ligaments of the pelvis that I need you to know are the sacrospinous ligament, which attaches from the sacrum to the ischial spine, and the sacrotuberous ligament, which attaches from the sacrum to the ischial tuberosity. These ligaments limit sacral flexion, and they also create the sciatic foramen of which we discussed earlier. Take this opportunity to pause the lecture to draw on the sacrospinous ligament, the sacrotuberous ligament, the obturator membrane, and the posterior sacroiliac ligaments. How does your drawing compare? The greater sciatic notch, the sacrotuberous ligament, and the sacrospinous ligament form the greater sciatic foramen. The piriformis muscle, the gluteal nerves, arteries, and veins, the sciatic nerve, and the pudendal nerve and internal pudendal artery pass through the greater sciatic foramen. The lesser sciatic notch, the sacral tuberous ligament, and the sacral spinous ligament form the lesser sciatic foramen. The obturator internus tendon and the pudendal nerve and internal pudendal artery pass through the lesser sciatic foramen. Take this opportunity to pause the lecture to draw in the sacrospinous ligament, the sacrotuberous ligament, which form the greater and lesser sciatic foramen, and then draw the structures that pass through each of the foramen. How does your drawing compare? Take note of where the structures are located and make modifications to your own drawing. Also be sure to be using Netter to locate these structures. The pelvic floor is a series of 3 layers of muscle at the inferior opening of the pelvis. They include the urogenital triangle, the urogenital diaphragm, and the pelvic diaphragm. The urogenital triangle is the most superficial of the 3 layers of muscle, and it is also known as the superficial genital muscles. These muscles include the ischiocavernosus, bulbospongiosus, and the superficial transverse perineal. The ischiocavernosus and the bulbospongiosus muscles assist in erection. The superficial transverse perineal muscle stabilizes the perineal body, which is the connective tissue between the vagina and the anus. These muscles are all innervated by the pudendal nerve, with contribution from S2 through S4. Study this diagram to be able to label the ischiocavernosus, bulbospongiosus, and superficial transverse perineal muscles. Note that we have a set of these 3 muscles, 1 on each side. Also note these muscles are present in both males and females. The urogenital diaphragm consists of the voluntary external urethral sphincter, also known as the striated urogenital sphincter muscle, and the deep transverse perineal muscle. Both of these muscles are innervated by the pudendal nerve, which has contribution from the sacral nerves S2 through S4. The very important function of the voluntary external urethral sphincter is to compress the urethra and also the urethra and vagina in females. This allows for closure of the urethra so that you do not have urinary leakage. In females, the external urethral sphincter is further divided into the compressor urethrae, the urethrovaginal muscle, and the sphincter urethrae muscles. The function of the deep transverse perineal muscle is to stabilize the perineal body and provide support for the internal organs. The pelvic diaphragm is the deepest layer of muscle and consists of the levator ani and coccygeus muscles. They are striated skeletal muscle, and their main function is to support the pelvic viscera. The pelvic diaphragm muscles also prevent a constant strain on the visceral ligaments. The levator ani muscle shares a common connection with the obturator internus to the tendinous arch of the pelvic floor. Therefore, the muscle activity of the levator ani is influenced by the activity of the obturator internus muscle. The obturator internus muscle is a muscle of the hip joint. The levator ani consists of 3 separate muscles: the puborectalis, the pubococcygeus, and the iliococcygeus. These muscles are innervated by the ventral rami of S3 through S5, also known as nerve to levator ani. The puborectalis attaches to the pubis, goes to the rectum, and also connects to the central tendon. The central tendon is the connective tissue between the anus and the coccyx. The pubococcygeus attaches to the pubis and the tendinous arch of the levator ani. This is also called the arcuate ligament. The pubococcygeus also attaches to the central tendon and the coccyx. Note that the tendinous arch, also known as the arcuate ligament, is a connective tissue thickening of the fascia overlying the obturator internus muscle. The iliococcygeus is also attached to the tendinous arch, as well as the central tendon and the coccyx. This slide shows the relationship between the levator ani muscle and the obturator internus muscle and its common attachment to the tendinous arch. The coccygeus muscle is attached to the ischial spine of the ischium, the sacrum, and the coccyx. The coccygeus lies deep to the sacrospinous ligament. Its function is to stabilize and flex the coccyx. Its innervation is the nerve to coccygeus, with contribution from the S3 through S4 or the S4 through S5 spinal nerves. This innervation or innervation contribution can be variable. Study this slide to understand the relationship between the levator ani muscle, the coccygeus, and the piriformis. Also note the arcuate ligament as it's an extension of the obturator fascia, and the orientation of the levator ani muscle with the obturator internus muscle. This slide provides links to further diagrams to help you understand the pelvic diaphragm. The pudendal nerve comes from the sacral plexus of S2 through S4. The pudendal nerve exits the pelvis via the greater sciatic foramen, then crosses over the sacrospinous ligament and re-enters the pelvis in the lesser sciatic foramen. The pudendal nerve then runs through a connective tissue band called Alcock's canal. This band of tissue is a common place for pudendal nerve compression, causing pelvic pain. The pudendal nerve further branches into three branches called the dorsal nerve, the perineal nerve, and the inferior rectal nerve. The pudendal nerve has somatosensory, sympathetic, and voluntary motor contribution. The dorsal nerve innervates the penis and clitoris. The perineal nerve innervates the posterior scrotum, labia, vagina, muscles of the urogenital triangle, and perineal membrane. The inferior rectal nerve innervates the external anal sphincter and perineal body. This slide provides further links to learn more about the pudendal nerve and its anatomy. Additional somatosensory and sympathetic innervation to this region is supplied by the iliohypogastric nerve, ilioinguinal nerve, and the genital branch of the femoral nerve.